Last hour, President Trump tried to make amends for failing to condemn white supremacists by name over the weekend in the Charlottesville, Virginia attack. But for many, the damage is clearly already done. Today, one of the most prominent African-American CEOs, Ken Frazier of Merck Pharmaceuticals, he's quit the president's manufacturing council. And in a statement, Frazier wrote this: America's leaders must honor our fundamental values by clearly rejecting expressions of hatred, bigotry, and group supremacy. President Trump, within minutes, lashed out on Twitter, quote, "Now that Ken Frazier of Merck Pharma has resigned from the president's manufacturing council, he will have more time to lower rip-off drug prices," close quote. Let's discuss this and more with my next guest, our CNN contributor, former president and CEO of the NAACP, Cornell William Brooks. First, your reaction to Ken Frazier of Merck Pharmaceuticals quitting the president's council.
Well, Ken Frazier is a very well-respected CEO, very well-respected lawyer. For him to take this move, to take this step, is a measure of the frustration, the righteous indignation of many Americans. For him to quit the Manufacturers Council as one of the nation's most prominent business leaders says that what the president failed to do heretofore struck a deep chord in this country, as in a deep chord of disgust. He did the right thing. So
a lot of people are pointing out within minutes the president responded, went after him on Twitter, but it's taken him several days now, since Saturday, Sunday, today's Monday, to formally try to fix what he initially should have said on Saturday. Let me play the clip of what he finally said today.
Racism is evil, and those who cause violence in its name are criminals and thugs, including the KKK, neo-Nazis, white supremacists, and other hate groups that are repugnant to everything we hold dear as Americans. We are a nation founded on the truth that all of us are created equal. We are. All
right, so what's your reaction?
My reaction is this. Let's note this. The president responded within a nanosecond to Ken Frazier quitting the council as a consequence of his moral failure. But it took him several days for him to call out white nationalists, Klansmen, and white supremacists for their violent conduct in Charlottesville. That is a tragedy. The fact of the matter is, when the White House issued a statement anonymously clarifying what the president should have said but failed to say, it suggested that the president was trying to have his hate cake and eat it too. That is to say, condemn implicitly, obliquely white nationalists without calling them out. So today's statement is certainly an improvement, but it represents the rhetorical minimum. It is not yet the moral maximum until such time as we see responsive policy.
He did announce that the Department of Justice is formally opening up a civil rights investigation into that individual who allegedly took that vehicle as a weapon, went into that crowd, killed that young woman, injured 20 others.
Yes, it's an important step, but let us note this. We commend the president for directing prosecutorial and investigative resources into looking into that particular crime. But to the extent that this defendant was standing in the midst of neo-Nazis, in the midst of white supremacists, to what degree is there a larger crime? The president has not yet spoken to what else happened in Charlottesville. To what degree did this go well beyond an individual? That's critically important, particularly when this act of driving a car into a crowd motivated by racism and anti-Semitism looks like terrorism.
Clearly, this individual who's been charged now denied bond. Earlier this morning, he, at least in high school, his high school teacher says he was sympathetic to neo-Nazi thoughts. Do you have confidence the Civil Rights Division at the Justice Department can really move forward effectively and get the job done?
Having served in the Civil Rights Division, I have total confidence in the career prosecutors in the Civil Rights Division and the career professionals in the Department of Justice. As was said earlier, the issue here are the political appointees. The issue here is the direction given by the Attorney General and given by the White House. And so the point being here is that if career prosecutors are allowed to do what it is that they have taken an oath to do, we'll get justice. But we need to hear from the top.
Because they clearly see this as a hate crime. Thanks very much, Cornell William Brooks, joining us. Coming up, the man spearheading the Russia probe is making some bold new moves. The New York Times reports that Robert Mueller wants to talk with key current and former Trump administration officials. So who is on the Mueller list? We'll have details when we come back.
4 seconds on the clock. Down.
Investigation into Russia's
classified information.
Feel WWF saying.
Counsel Robert Mueller is now seeking interviews with key members of the Trump administration, including the former White House Chief of Staff Reince Priebus. That, according to the New York Times. Special Counsel Robert.
Now.
This is CNN, the most trusted name in news.
Special Counsel Robert Mueller is now seeking interviews with key members of the Trump administration, including the former White House Chief of Staff Reince Priebus. That, according to the New York Times. The Times also reporting that as part of the investigation into Russia's efforts to influence last year's presidential election here in the United States, Mueller has already asked for details on specific meetings and is looking into President Trump's decision to fire the FBI Director James Comey. Our Shimon Prokopez is following all these developments for us. What else do we know, Shimon, about the latest developments in the investigation?
Right. So this story seems to indicate that they're now, Mueller's team, among some of the things they're now getting to is the obstruction. Key in this story is that it looks like Mueller and his team want to talk to Reince Priebus. And the significance of that is that Reince apparently had a meeting with Comey the week before Trump, the president, met with Comey and said, you know, let this investigation go, let the Flynn investigation go. The week prior to that, when Comey meets with Reince, Comey tells Reince, you know, this is inappropriate. You shouldn't be reaching out to the FBI, speaking to us directly. So the key there would seem that Mueller wants to see what did Reince relate to the president about what's appropriate and what's not appropriate. In terms of the other parts of the investigation, the financial investigation, really we know a lot about Manafort, you know, the search warrant that was executed at his home. Depending on who you talk to, that sometimes means the investigation is near completion, or they may start to make some moves of an arrest or other things. But some are telling us, you know, they're still going through documents. They're still searching through the various other documents that they've received from banks, from corporations, from other companies that the folks within the Trump world were part of. So everything is still ongoing. There's no conclusion in sight. We don't see them moving on anything in particular right now. And the investigation is just still ongoing.
Any reaction from the White House so far?
No, you know, various people here at CNN have tried to have reached out to the White House, and they have not responded to us. None of the president's attorneys, you know, other folks who have attorneys who are now still at the White House and have attorneys, they have not gone back to us either.
Clearly, Robert Mueller, the special counsel, he has not been intimidated by some of the criticism that's been leveled against him.
Yeah, no, if anything, he's digging in. And, you know, if you speak to people, and I've spoke to someone actually over the weekend who knows Mueller, who has worked for Mueller, so this is exactly the way he does things, you know, using a grand jury, using subpoenas, using search warrants. It's all part of how he views investigations should be conducted.
It could have been awkward, but today, totally unrelated, the new FBI Director, Christopher Wray, and the Attorney General, Jeff Sessions, they had a private meeting with the President of the United States. It could have been awkward, but talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, interestingly enough, if you notice, it was the Attorney General, Jeff Sessions, and the FBI Director who went there together. He did not seek to speak to the FBI Director alone, which would indicate perhaps maybe he's learned his lessons, that this is not appropriate, that he should not be reaching out to the FBI Director on his own. It is interesting. It is important that they both went there together and met with him and briefed him on the investigation. But so, you know, we'll see.
And no cameras.
That's right, yeah.
All right, that could have been awkward indeed. Yeah. All right, thanks very much, Shimon Prokopez, joining us. That's it for me. Thanks very much for watching. I'll be back 5 p.m. Eastern in the Situation Room. In the meantime, the news continues right now, right here on CNN.
Thank you, Kate, and welcome to Inside Politics. I'm John King. Thanks for sharing your day with us. President Trump is back in Washington for the day, now trying to clean up a profound mess, a mess of his own making. The initial reason for interrupting his vacation was to take issue with China's trade policies. That is still on tap a few hours from now. But at this hour, The president is in a newly scheduled meeting with his attorney general and his new FBI director. They are investigating the death this weekend in Charlottesville, Virginia, as a possible hate crime or domestic terrorism.
You can be sure we will charge and advance the investigation toward the most serious charges that can be brought, because this is an unequivocally unacceptable and evil attack.
Those words from the Attorney General. Yet for 3 days now, the President of the United States has declined to explicitly condemn the white supremacists and neo-Nazis whose marches sparked the weekend chaos and bloodshed. That failure has brought a torrent of criticism, much of it from fellow Republicans who say the President is failing a giant leadership and character test.
This president has done an incredible job of naming terrorism around the globe as evil, radical Islamic terrorism, whether it's in Europe or the Middle East. He has said and called it out time and time again, and this president needs to do exactly that today. Call this white supremacism, this white nationalism evil, and let the country hear it, let the world hear it.
With us to share their reporting and their insights, Margaret Taleb of Bloomberg Politics, CNN's Manu Raju, Matt Visor of the Boston Globe, and Jackie Kucinich of the Daily Beast. The Ohio man charged with plowing his car into a crowd Saturday in Charlottesville was arraigned on murder and other charges this morning and ordered held without bail. This morning's court hearing for James Alex Field Jr. was on state charges. He also, of course, is central to the federal investigation now that the president is hearing about at the White House as we speak. When we are told we will hear from the president again about Charlottesville later today. His team, including the vice president, say it is a media creation that the president fell miserably short in his Saturday statement, blaming the violence on, quote, many sides. Wrong. Leading Republicans are part of a giant bipartisan chorus saying the president of the United States failed a big leadership test by failing to name names and single out the hate mongers. It is not the media, but leading Republicans who say the president seems tone deaf, even soft, they say, in the wake of a domestic terrorist attack on his watch. And this morning, well, the president dug the hole deeper. Not one tweet over the weekend or this morning on the scourge of white supremacy, but a rush to attack an African-American CEO who resigned from a White House manufacturing panel because he is disappointed by the president's response to Charlottesville. Kenneth Frazier of Merck Pharmaceuticals said he quit because, quote, America's leaders must honor our fundamental views by clearly rejecting expressions of hatred, bigotry, and group supremacy. The president's response? To attack. Now that Ken Frazier of Merck Pharma has resigned from the president's manufacturing council, the president said on Twitter, he will have more time to lower rip-off drug prices. I asked yesterday when we were here for Inside Politics, why? Why can't the president name names? Why wouldn't the president name names? Why this? The country and the world are waiting to hear from you. You get a chance to reset. You get a chance to say, maybe I didn't get it right the first time, and you attack an African-American CEO. Why not retweet him and say, you know what, Ken, I agree. I agree. Please don't quit. Listen to what I say later today. Why?
Well, I think we are going to hear from him today, possibly really soon, and I think he's going to need to articulate these points. He's now effectively taken a tragedy that was not at its outset about him, made it about him, and then tempted his own party and top business executives, basically dared them, stick with me, or I'll come after you. And it has created a real moment of dissonance at a time that traditionally has called for presidential healing. And at Bloomberg, we're watching obviously all these other advisory councils to see whether other CEOs, black or white or of any race, follow suit. It has taken a major news event out of one realm and put it squarely at the White House, and it's caused a real mess.
It's just I've wound up a bit about this, but this is why we elect presidents. And if you're out there and you're voted for Trump, or if you didn't vote for Trump, this is why we elect presidents, to step up at moments like this. This is what they're paid for. And frankly, this is what a lot of Americans pray for. They pray for their president to step forward at a moment like this and try to unify the country. Why?
Hey, John, what's been remarkable, too, over the past days to see all these administration officials essentially try to put words in the president's mouth, trying to say things that he didn't say. Ben Carson, his HUD secretary, saying on Facebook that the president, quote, overly disavowed any relationship with white supremacists. The president did not do that. In this unnamed White House official put out a statement yesterday saying the president, of course, disavows these groups. Well, the president... Jeff Sessions on the shows this morning, but the president has not done that himself. And this is a time that calls for presidential leadership. He could have put out a 140-character tweet just as quickly as he did to criticize the CEO this morning. Could have done that to say, of course I criticize, I'm calling out white supremacists, KKK, neo-Nazis. It's chosen explicitly not to do that.
But this isn't the first time. This is a pattern from this president. I mean, look how long it took him to disavow David Duke, of all people. I mean, goodness sake. So I don't know if it's because this is a group of people that do not criticize the president, so he doesn't feel like he needs to hit back. That's definitely something worth looking into. But this is a gimme. This is an easy thing to say. White supremacists are bad. Nazis are bad. We should all disavow them.
I don't want to understate the horror of what happened. A woman is dead. 2 Virginia State police officers were killed when a helicopter crashed. They were there responding to this. We should be talking about that. We should be talking about these organizations. But you're right. The president made it about him. Before you jump in, I just want to go back to this because your point about Ben Carson, the Attorney General this morning, I would make the case that these people who think they're trying to help the president are making it worse for him because they are speaking out clearly, including the Vice President of the United States. He is traveling in Colombia. Listen to the Vice President's here. The Vice President says it is a media creation, that the President of the United States, the Vice President says, called it out clearly. Listen.
President Trump clearly and unambiguously condemned the bigotry, violence, and hatred which took place on the streets of Charlottesville. We have no tolerance for hate and violence from white supremacists, neo-Nazis, or the KKK. These dangerous fringe groups have no place in American public life and in the American debate, and we condemn them in the strongest possible terms.
Well put by the Vice President there. His initial statement Saturday was not so clear, and you heard the Vice President say the President did that. The President did what he just did, called him out by names. Here's the President on Saturday. He did no such thing.
We condemn in the strongest possible terms this egregious display of hatred, bigotry, and violence on many sides. On many sides. It's been going on for a long time in our country. Not Donald Trump, not Barack Obama. It's been going on for a long, long time. There's no place in America.
He's certainly right, Matt. Racism, bigotry, hatred have been going on for a long time, but he's the President of the United States. His test was to respond to the specifics of what happened on his watch.
And there are moments like that for a president. You think of George W. Bush on the rubble after 9/11 or Barack Obama after the shootings in Charleston. There are moments for a president to speak to the country and to unite the country. And part of that, Trump is calling for unity without recognizing that there's a segment of the population that believes in him that has racist ideology, that he's not rejecting that. And that's a big deal. And Trump, during the campaign, showed a master at branding people and sort of diminishing them very quickly with that branding. He's not used that skill that he has to direct it at this neo-Nazi group that believes in him. And that's telling that he's not doing that. And so I think he has moments today where he can do some of that and speak out in a way that he so far has
The
not.
question is telling of what? Is it just that he doesn't want to criticize people who he knows supports him? There are those saying that this is proof to them that he sympathizes with them, which we all pray is not the case. But when you have a lack of clarity, you allow people to make their own interpretation, including these groups, which are saying the president hasn't singled us out. This is a good thing.
Yeah. And let's see what the Justice Department does. There is an investigation that has been opened into these incidents, and whether they prosecute, how hard do they go after these groups? I mean, that is something that we're certainly watching, and I think the country will be watching.
And to your point about the president has been very clear. If he doesn't like you, if he wants to criticize you, he does it quite well. This is Eric Erickson of the Resurgent, a conservative activist, not always a Trump fan. So Trump critics will say, well, he doesn't like us to begin with. Trump supporters, will say he doesn't like us to begin with. But in the New York Times, this is the same president who routinely mocked and attacked Barack Obama and Hillary Clinton for failing to call Islamic radicalism by its name. In Charlottesville, evil has a name, and it is white supremacy. Silence and obfuscation in the face of evil only feeds evil. Naming and exposing evil forces it back into the shadows. The president who warned Barack Obama to name radical Islam should take his own advice and be forceful. That from a conservative, again, not always a Trump fan, but from a conservative, I would urge the vice president who wants to blame this on the media to read that and to read the Twitter feeds of about 650 Republican lawmakers who are or more getting in the president's face.
And also some of his allies, like the New York Post editorial page, one of the president's favorite newspapers, also taking him to task. You make a good point. The president made all these points about political correctness on the campaign trail. Why is he showing any sort of nuance here at a time when this is a president who rarely shows nuance and going after people? The only time that he really shows nuance or skirts criticism it seems to be, according to Republicans and Democrats have pointed this out, about Vladimir Putin. He does not want to criticize Vladimir Putin. And why is he not calling out white supremacists? I mean, that doesn't make any sense to a lot of folks. We'll see what he does today. He could still clean it up. He could still say it in a very strong, direct terms. But maybe he's defensive over all the criticism he's gotten.
And if you listen to the chants, we should be shaming the protesters. We should be playing for you, although probably not too much because you're just giving them the attention they want. But the protests, the screams against Jewish people, the screams against African Americans, the rants by those protesters both Friday night and then on Saturday, to the point we're discussing, the former Secretary of State John Kerry tweeting, POTUS has been tougher naming and shaming an American CEO and Senate Majority Leader than a domestic terrorist who took an American life. I mean, this is the criticism now for the president, which makes a lot of people just simply, I keep asking the same question. Why? What is it about him? What is it about his team? That why can't they figure out, hey, it's just a moral obligation of anybody. But he's the president of the United States.
Last week and the week before, we were all talking about John Kelly, the new chief of staff, and how his mandate was going to be to return order and structure and priority to the White House as best he could. And we don't have a lot of visibility into the internal discussions going on about how the president would respond to this. We know he's been up at Bedminster and is now back in D.C. today. But this has been also a test for that new chief of staff in terms of helping the president to understand the implications of doing this one way, doing it another way, the inclusion of some comments, the absence of other comments. It seems to be underscoring the idea that the president ultimately does always go with his own gut and make his own decisions.
And I think, like Jackie was saying, I mean, there's a base instinct with Trump that seems to be, if you are nice to me, I'm nice to you. If you're mean to me, I'm mean to you. And it's kind of, this is a group that supported him during the campaign, and so he's been reluctant to disavow himself from it. And that sort of elemental instinct of his is not even overriding the fact that they're Nazis.
And we also know that the president does not like to admit when he's wrong. He's getting all this criticism right now from the media, from his own party, from Democrats. For him to come out and say something would be an acknowledgement of making a mistake. Perhaps that's one reason why he has not tried to clean this up after his comment on Saturday.
Well, we'll see if we hear from him today. He's meeting with the Attorney General of the United States right now. He's meeting with his new FBI director right now. They promise an aggressive investigation into possible domestic terrorism, into possible hate crimes. They're way out ahead of the president. We'll see if he says something, and we'll see whether he waits till this afternoon or whether he speaks sooner. When we come back, more of this conversation. This incident in Charlottesville and the president's response only increasing the view that more and more, even in his own Republican Party, the president is on an island.
Charlottesville. This, of course, will be the second time that he'll be making comments on this. The first time he was slammed by both Democrats and Republicans for failing to say enough, for failing to condemn white supremacists by name. Since the tragedy struck the Virginia city, pressure has been mounting on the president to call out groups like the KKK and neo-Nazis by name, just as his vice president and his attorney general have. So far, he has not. I want to bring in right now John Adams. He's a Republican nominee running to be the top law enforcement officer in the state of Virginia. Attorney General, great to see you. Thank you so much, Mr. Adams, for coming in.
Thank you for having me, Kate.
Just since it is quite brief and to the point, you put a statement out on this on Saturday, and it says this: the neo-Nazi the Nazi ideology on display in Charlottesville is disgusting. Our greatest generation fought and crushed it, so will we. That's pretty straight and to the point. Why don't you think the president said the same?
Well, you know, I can't speak for the president and what he said, but I'm a lawyer, Kate, and I look at the facts on the ground and I call it like I see it. And I was campaigning in southwestern Virginia that day, but I was paying attention to what was happening in Charlottesville. And you can't deny what happened in Charlottesville. There were Nazi flags. They were chanting Nazi slogans. And then, of course, later on in the day, we had this horrific murder of this innocent young woman by a Nazi sympathizer who had come down from Ohio. And, you know, I just called it like I saw it. In Virginia, it's a wonderful, wonderful place to live and work and raise a family. And we just don't tolerate this type of hatred, no matter where it comes from. And when it does come, you got to call it what it is.
Well, you call it like you see it, and when you see it, you have to call it like it is what you just said. President Trump is not one to hold back. He's not one to call it like he sees it on any turn. I mean, he had no problem calling out the CEO of a company just today for dropping out of one of his councils, one of his White House councils, but he hasn't called out these groups by name. How does that make sense?
Well, look, I mean, the president made his statement. I believe the White House came out afterwards and specifically condemned white supremacists. I think the president is going to make a statement later today. I don't know what he's going to say.
The White House did. It was put out by an unnamed spokesman, but even the president himself, Mr. Adams, says that he's his own spokesman. He only speaks for himself, and we've got innumerable examples of how that is definitely the truth. Is the president wrong in not calling them out by name?
You know, I called it like I saw it on the ground. I'm not going to criticize him at this point in time. He's going to make another statement this afternoon. I will tell you what I am. Well, hold on. I'll tell you what I am encouraged by. I'm encouraged by Attorney General Jeff Sessions saying that the Department of Justice is going to intervene, because I think one of your guests earlier said action means more than words, and that is absolutely true. And so while I'm absolutely confident that our state prosecutors in Charlottesville would prosecute this crime to the fullest extent of the law, it's encouraging for me as a former federal prosecutor to see the federal authorities looking at this as well, to ensure that all of the possibilities.
A lot of this comes down to leadership. You're talking about leadership, you know, the Justice Department, leading the country, moral authority. Moral authority, doesn't it sit with the president? Do you think you want to hear the president say more? But again, was he wrong in not calling it out in the first place?
Well, again, I'm not going to criticize the president. I don't know what he knew at that time. I don't know what he was following. You saw what I said.
Right.
What I will say is,
was it difficult for you to say that?
No, it's not difficult for me to say that. But look at what we've had to deal with in Virginia just in the last 60 days. We have Congressman Scalise and Republican officials in Virginia being shot at by a deranged leftist, right? Clearly targeted because of their political beliefs. In Charlottesville, we saw innocent people targeted because of their race. So there's a lot of things going on in this country, Kate, that need a lot of help. And the president, made a statement.
The president called that one out when it came to Steve Scalise very quickly.
Well, when the president said he condemns all violence, that's clear from all sides. That's clearly a true statement on its face. And so I'm not going to criticize him for saying I'm not going to criticize him for saying he condemns all violence. I condemn all violence.
What do you say to the Republicans who called him out?
Virginia,
Lindsey Graham, Cory Gardner, go down the list, Marco Rubio, all of them who said that the president hasn't gone far enough and he was wrong for not calling them out. What do you say to them?
Fair enough. They can express their view on it. What I care about is what's happening in Virginia. I'm a Virginian running to be Virginia's Attorney General. We have a problem here in Virginia with this incident on Saturday. And I know myself, my running mates here in Virginia, we called it like we saw it. What the president does, that's the president's call. What I care about is we support that we need, if we need it from the federal side. And it sounds like, according to Attorney General Jeff Sessions, we're going to have that support. And so to me, running to be the Attorney General of Virginia, that's what I want to see. I want to see action. I want to see support from the feds if we need it. I want to make sure that the Commonwealth's attorney in Charlottesville has everything that they need to prosecute the case to the fullest extent of the law. And I'm an action person, and that's what I'm looking at.
All right. Words and actions seems to be a big theme today. John Adams, I appreciate it. Thank you very much for your time.
Thanks for having me on, Kate.
Appreciate it. Coming up for us, the former White House Communications Director, Anthony Scaramucci, slamming Steve Bannon over the weekend, implying he's a leaker. Scaramucci's not the only one casting doubts over Bannon's future. Details on that, constant rumors, that's coming up. One of the people closest to the president inside the West Wing finding himself on thin ice. Steve Bannon, the president's chief strategist and former head of the alt-right news outlet Breitbart. We're talking about Steve Bannon. The president's chief strategist. National Security Advisor H.R. McMaster, he repeatedly refused to say if he can even work with Bannon when he was asked a series of questions just yesterday. And the recently fired White House Communications Director Anthony Scaramucci says Bannon is hurting the president's agenda. Listen to this.
Been tough on Steve Bannon. Does he have to go?
Well, I think the president knows what he's going to do.
What?
Well, let's leave it up to the president. It's his decision. But I mean, at the end of the day, I think the president has a very good idea of who the leakers are inside the White House. The president has a very good idea of the people that are undermining his agenda, that are serving their own interests.
They include Steve Bannon?
Oh yeah, look, I mean, we're not on a phone call and a tape phone call, and so we're on live television, and so I would prefer to let the president make the decisions that the president needs to make.
Can you and Steve Bannon still work together in this White House or not? I get to work together with a broad range of talented people, and it is a privilege every day to enable the national security team.
You didn't answer. Can you and Steve Bannon work in that same White House?
I am ready to work with anybody who will help advance the president's agenda and advance the security, prosperity of the American people.
Do you believe Steve Bannon does that?
I believe that everyone who works in the White House, who has the privilege, the great privilege every day of serving their nation, should be motivated by that goal.
Take that basically as a no comment, I guess. The CNN special correspondent Jamie Kingell is joining me now with much more on this. So, Jamie, what are you hearing from your sources? How thin is the ice that Steve Bannon is on right now?
It's cracking. That said, two things that are important. This predates Charlottesville. And the other thing is that the people I'm talking to say, don't count Steve Bannon out yet. He is a survivor, and they do not think that this is imminent. Of course, that's up to one person, and that's Donald Trump. But one of the things I'm hearing is that the president thinks that it is safer to have Steve Bannon on the inside. We have known for quite some time that Jared Kushner would like Steve Bannon gone. Ivanka would like Steve Bannon gone.
How is that any way to run a White House? He's less dangerous if I keep him close than he is outside. I mean, then Steve Bannon has all the power? Is that what we're saying?
Well,
I mean,
the people that I'm talking to say over and over, and these are senior Republicans who have direct knowledge of what's going on, that there is a concern in the White House that if Steve Bannon is a troublemaker inside the White House, you take him outside of the bubble, he's angry, he's now been kicked out, that it could get even worse.
So stand by on the Steve Bannon news.
Right.
You're also hearing
been kicked out, that it could get even worse.
So stand by on the Steve Bannon news.
Right.
You're also hearing some reaction already from your sources on the Merck CEO stepping down from the White House Council, Manufacturing Council, and the president attacking him this morning. What are you hearing?
Right. So this happened immediately. Elected Republican officials up on the Hill within seconds of Donald Trump's tweet about the Merck CEO immediately texted me and said, here's one quote, "It is outrageous that he, President Trump, so quickly and personally condemns Frazier," that's the CEO of Merck, while failing them white supremacists. They just can't believe it. And another source said to me, and this is someone who loves General Kelly and who has hoped that as chief of staff, he would be the answer.
Yeah.
This is another example of nobody can discipline Donald Trump but Donald Trump. And so
exhibit F.
Exactly.
G, H,
exactly.
Y, and Z. Great to see you, Jamie. I really, really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thanks for joining us at this hour. Inside Politics with John King starts right now. Hello, everyone. I'm Kate Baldwin. We are following breaking news. An accused killer in court and a U.S. president facing extraordinary criticism right now about what he didn't say about that Virginia car attack. Just minutes ago, James Alex Fields was formally arraigned, charged with plowing his car into a crowd of people, killing one person, injuring 19 others. He was denied bond. by the judge in court today. The victims involved here were among those protesting, of course, the weekend rally by white supremacists. But in condemning the violence that broke out, President Trump did not single out the white hate groups. Instead, he blamed, quote, many sides, he said. That comment from President Trump triggered bipartisan criticism for being vague, evasive, and equivocating. The president is now expected to speak again on the issue today. We do know that he is being briefed this hour on the case by his Attorney General and the new FBI Director. Attorney General Jeff Sessions this month.
I thought it was a good statement delivered just a few hours after the event. The next day, yesterday, they explicitly called out the Nazis and the KKK.
The president
by
did
name.
not. General Sessions, that statement that you're referring to came from the White House. It was attributed to.
It came from the White House.
But it was attributed to an unnamed spokesperson. And here's a president, as you know, General Sessions, he's not afraid to take to Twitter to chastise a number of folks, yourself included. He's not afraid to call out terrorism overseas. But here's a president that didn't do that. Why?
The president did do that yesterday. His spokesman
that wasn't
said
the president.
that.
That's not the same as the president of the United States.
Me. You asked me, I was giving you an answer. There was a White House spokesman that made that statement explicitly condemning these groups by name, and I'm sure he'll talk again about it soon.
Today, the President of the United States today is going to explicitly condemn these so-called alt-right groups and white nationalist groups.
He will be speaking to the people today. I'm not sure what he'll say. That's my understanding. And he's been firm on this from the beginning. He is appalled by this.
So stand by for that. Let's begin right now with White House correspondent Jeff Zeleny and the president's meeting this hour and what the president could be saying this afternoon. Jeff, despite the backlash that we've been seeing, it's been silent so far on Twitter from the president on Charlottesville. What are you expecting today?
I mean, Kate, so interesting. It has been silent on that topic, although the president has been very active on other topics. But he is taking a brief, a pre-scheduled departure from his working vacation here in New Jersey. He's back at the White House at this hour. He'll be meeting shortly, as you said, with the Attorney General and the Director of the FBI. I am told by a White House official that they expect him to take questions about Charlottesville and other matters perhaps later this afternoon, but we will see what the president says about this. He, of course, keeps his own counsel on this. Many advisors have urged him to say something. They also, I'm told, believe that all this, a blowback is misplaced somewhat, as you could hear there from the Attorney General. But there's no question, Kate, this has consumed his August vacation, at least this part of it. So it was left to his Vice President, Mike Pence, who's traveling in South America, to talk directly about this. Let's watch.
We have no tolerance for hate and violence from white supremacists, neo-Nazis, or the KKK. These dangerous fringe groups have no place in American public life and in the American debate. I will say I take issue with the fact that many in the national media spend more time criticizing the president's words than they did criticizing those who perpetrated the violence to begin with.
So that was something, Kate, you heard the vice president again going after the media and others for the coverage of this. But the issue here is the Republican members of Congress, the House, the Senate, a bipartisan group of governors have come out and condemned this and have called on the president to specifically and directly condemn the white supremacists here. So I think you got a window into the mindset of the president and the White House here with the vice president's remarks there. We do expect him to talk about it again today. But one White House official told me earlier today, Kate, it's his call how much he directly talks about this. It's a fascinating moment for this president. Many of his supporters would like him to issue some moral clarity on this and move on, but we'll see what he does later today, Kate.
Yeah, in terms of it's his call, it always has been. It was when he made his initial statement, and it will be now. So, exactly right. Great to see you, Jeff. Thanks so much. A lot to come. The president not talking about Charlottesville yet this morning, but he was quick, as Jeff pointed out, to take to Twitter to call out someone else by name. Kenneth Frazier, the CEO of the major pharmaceutical company Merck. This came just after Frazier announced this morning that he was quitting President Trump's White House Manufacturing Council. Why, you wonder? Well, it is over the president's failure to condemn white supremacists in his remarks this weekend. Frazier is one of the country's most prominent black corporate executives. For more on this, becoming a very big story, let me bring in right now CNN's Allison Cossack. What exactly is going on here, Allison?
All right, so Kate, what happened here is CEO of Merck, Kenneth Frazier, he took to Twitter to resign from the president's manufacturing council, saying that this was all in protest of how the president responded to the violence that we saw over the weekend in Charlottesville. Now, here's what Frazier said, in part: America's leaders must honor our fundamental values by clearly rejecting expressions of hatred, bigotry, and group supremacy, which run counter to the American ideal that all people are created equal. He goes on to say, as CEO of Merck and as a matter of personal conscience, I feel a responsibility to take a stand against intolerance and extremism. Once this was put out on Twitter, the president wasted little time in his response, almost pouncing on Frazier, saying this in a tweet, saying, now that Ken Frazier of Merck Pharma has resigned from President's Manufacturing Council, he will have more time to lower rip-off drug prices. Kate?
So that's where things are today, but what do we know about the relationship between Ken Frazier